The plains didn't forgive men. They didn't forget them either. They just remembered. Every hoofprint, every grave, every bullet buried in the dirt like a rotten seed. And that morning, the wind carried those memories across the land like whispers. Silas Mercer stood alone at the edge of his ranch fence, staring into the distance where the horizon trembled in the heat. The sun wasn't even fully up yet, but already the air felt heavy, like the sky was holding its breath, like something bad was thinking about happening. He chewed on the end of a dry matchstick and narrowed his eyes. 40 years on this land. 40 years of sweat, gunpowder, and ghosts. His ranch wasn't much to look at, just a tired cabin, a crooked barn, and fences that had been patched more times than they'd been built. But every board had a story, and every scar on his body matched one out there somewhere. A long white line across his forearm, arrow wound. The notch in his ear, stray bullet. His limp, bad winter, broken horse, no doctor for 2 days. This land didn't raise soft men. It shaved them down until only bone and grit were left. Silas liked it that way. He didn't trust easy lives. Didn't trust easy people either. The only sounds were windmills creaking and cattle shifting restlessly. But something was off. The animals knew it first. They always did. The horses refused their feed. The cows huddled tighter than usual. Even the birds had gone quiet. Too quiet. Silas spat into the dust. "Storm's comin'," he muttered. But the sky was clear, not a cloud in sight. Still, his gut didn't lie. It never had. He stepped onto the porch and picked up his rifle. Not because he expected trouble, but because on these plains, trouble expected you. By mid-morning, the heat turned mean, the kind of heat that crawls under your skin, the kind that makes memories feel closer than they should. Silas rode out to check the north boundary, slow pace, horse breathing heavy. The world stretched endless and empty. Except it wasn't. Not today. He saw them first as shapes, small, moving, too steady to be cattle, too quiet to be travelers. His jaw tightened. Apache. A band of them. Maybe 6, maybe 8. Far off, riding the ridge like shadows. Watching. Always watching. They weren't close enough to threaten, but not far enough to ignore. That was their way. Not charging. Not hiding. Just existing near you, like a reminder, like a memory you couldn't outrun. Silas felt that old tightness in his chest, old wars waking up. Years ago, men he knew had died out here. Neighbors, friends, good men, and he'd buried them himself with a shovel and shaking hands. He wasn't proud of what came after. Retaliations, ambushes, blood for blood. It had been ugly, pointless, but grief makes monsters out of decent men, and everyone out here had been a monster at some point. Even him. Especially him. He watched the riders through narrowed eyes. One of them turned. Even at this distance, he could feel it. They were looking back. Not afraid, not aggressive, just aware. 2 old predators measuring each other. Then they disappeared over the ridge like smoke. Gone, but not gone. Never really gone. Silas adjusted his hat and muttered, "Shoulda stayed ghosts." By afternoon, the wind changed. Sudden, hard, hot. It came from the south like a furnace door opening. Dust lifted from the ground in thin spirals,
little devils dancing across the plains. Silas stopped his horse and stared at the horizon again. Something wasn't right. The sky wasn't blue anymore. It was brown, faint at first, like a smudge, then thicker, like smoke from a giant fire. His heartbeat slowed. Not fear, recognition. He'd seen this once before, years ago. Lost 3 cows and damn near suffocated in his own barn. A dust storm, but not a small one. This one was big, wrong big, the kind old-timers whispered about, the kind that buried houses, the kind that erased towns, the kind that didn't just pass through, but swallowed. He turned his horse fast. "Move," he growled. They galloped hard for the ranch, wind picking up behind them, the air turning gritty, each breath tasting like sand. By the time he reached the barn, the world had already started fading, sun dimming, shadows stretching strange. The sky looked sick, like the earth itself was rising to attack the heavens. Silas threw open the doors and started working fast. Water barrels inside, feed sacks tied down, windows boarded, hands moving without thinking. Survival wasn't learned, it was remembered. Every nail he hammered sounded louder than it should, like time was running out. The wind screamed now, low and angry, and then he froze. Movement, far out, through the rising dust. Riders, same ridge, same silhouettes. The Apache band. They hadn't left. They were still out there, and the storm was coming straight for them. For a second, a cold thought crossed his mind. Not my problem. Old grudges whispered, old graves, old blood. But then another thought followed, quieter, heavier. Nobody survives that storm alone. Nobody. He gripped the fence rail, watching, dust climbing higher, wall getting closer, like the world's end rolling towards them. And for the first time in years, Silas Mercer felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not hate, not even fear, just one simple truth settling in his chest. Today, the plains weren't choosing sides, and whatever came next was bigger than all of them.
By late afternoon, the sky was gone. Not clouds, not darkness, just gone. Like someone had dragged a dirty curtain across the world. Silas had seen storms, thunderheads rolling like mountains, lightning splitting the night, flash floods turning creeks into monsters. But this wasn't weather. This was erasure. The horizon had disappeared completely. Where land once met sky, there was now only a rising wall of brown, a moving wall, tall as God, wide as forever. Dust, dirt, sand, whole pieces of the earth ripped loose and carried like smoke. And it was coming fast, too fast. The wind hit first. Not a gust, a shove. The barn doors slammed so hard they rattled the hinges. Loose tin screamed against the roof. The horses inside started kicking, eyes wide, whites showing. They could feel it too. Animals always knew when death was nearby. Silas tightened the last rope around the water barrel and stepped outside. Instant mistake. The air scratched his throat like broken glass. He pulled his bandana over his mouth. The wind howled louder now, not like air moving, but like something alive, something angry, something hunting. "Damn," he muttered. Then he saw them again, through the rising haze, shapes moving across the ridge. The Apache riders, still out there, still exposed, and now trapped.
The storm wasn't behind them anymore. It was on top of them. He could see the confusion even from here. Horses turning, men shouting, trying to outrun something you can't outrun. Nobody outruns the plains. Nobody outruns the sky. Silas felt his chest tighten, old memories clawing at him, men buried under collapsed barns, cattle suffocated standing up. A neighbor once found half a mile away, covered in dirt like he'd been planted. This storm would kill them, all of them. Apache, rancher, didn't matter. Dust didn't care about history, didn't care about grudges. It buried everyone the same. He should have gone inside, should have barred the doors, protected only his own. That's what men out here did. That's how you survived. But his boots didn't move. He kept watching those tiny figures fighting the wind, watching the storm swallow the world between them. And something inside him shifted, something he hadn't felt in years. Not hatred, not revenge, just recognition. Same fear, same struggle, same helplessness against something bigger. For the first time, they didn't look like enemies. They looked like men. The first wave hit like a slap. Dust blasted across the yard so thick it stung exposed skin. Silas staggered, couldn't see 5 feet ahead. The sky turned copper, then brown, then almost black. The sun vanished completely. Middle of the day suddenly felt like midnight. He heard wood cracking, fence posts snapping like twigs. The world was being sanded down piece by piece. Then, through the noise, a sound, faint, distant, a horse screaming, not neighing, screaming, the kind of sound animals make when they know they're about to die. Silas's jaw tightened. Damn it. He didn't think, didn't plan, just grabbed his coat, pulled goggles over his eyes, and mounted up. "Let's go, boy," he told the horse. The animal didn't want to move, but neither did he. Sometimes fear doesn't matter. Sometimes you move anyway. They rode straight into the storm. Visibility dropped to nothing. It felt like riding through a river of sand. Dust filled his ears, his nose, his teeth. Each breath burned. Wind pushed so hard it felt like hands trying to drag him off the saddle. He could barely see the barn anymore, could barely see his own reins. But he kept heading toward where he'd last seen the riders, guided by memory, by instinct, by something he couldn't explain. Then, shapes, shadows in the storm. One horse down, thrashing, pinned. A man trying to free it, another figure holding a blanket over a child. Child. Silas blinked. Apache band. Had families. Of course they did, but he'd never thought about it. Never pictured anything but warriors and arrows. But now, he saw it. Women, children, elders. Not raiders, not fighters, just people caught in hell. The man struggling with the horse looked up. Their eyes met through the dust. Years of hatred hung in that single glance. Years of stories, blood, loss. Silas half expected the man to reach for a weapon, but he didn't. He just shouted something Silas couldn't hear and pointed at the trapped animal. Simple, direct. Help. For half a second, old instincts screamed, leave them. But the storm roared louder, and something else inside him answered, not today. Silas jumped down and rushed forward. Together they pulled, straining, wind knocking them sideways, sand cutting skin raw. The horse finally came free, bolted, gone. Didn't matter. At least it was alive. The man gave Silas a short nod. No smile, no thanks, just understanding. That was enough. The storm thickened, impossible thick, like breathing mud. Everyone started moving toward the same low rock formation nearby, only shelter for miles. No one argued, no one hesitated, they just ran. Silas helped lift the smallest child. The kid clung to his coat like he was family. He didn't know why that hit him so hard, but it did. Inside the rocks, they huddled together, 20 bodies pressed tight against stone, wind screaming overhead like a freight train, dust pouring through every crack. The world outside disappeared completely. It wasn't ranchers and Apache anymore. It wasn't enemies. It wasn't history. It was just people trying to breathe, sharing water, covering faces, holding each other upright when the wind tried to knock them flat. Silas sat against the rock, heart pounding. Across from him, an older Apache man, gray hair, lined face, watched him calmly. Not suspicious, not angry, just tired. Same tired Silas felt. Two old men who'd survived too much, who'd buried too many, who suddenly understood something neither had ever said out loud. This land breaks everyone eventually. Doesn't matter what side you're on. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't exist inside the storm. Only noise, only survival. And for the first time in decades, Silas Mercer wasn't fighting another man. He was fighting the world itself. And somehow, they were fighting it together.
Inside the rocks, the world didn't exist anymore. No ranch, no borders, no history. Just wind. Endless wind. It screamed across the stone like some giant beast trying to claw its way inside. Dust hissed through cracks. Pebbles rattled like thrown gravel. Every now and then, something heavy slammed outside. Maybe a fence post, maybe part of someone's life getting torn away. Nobody spoke much. Talking felt pointless. The storm swallowed every word anyway. So they sat close, closer than enemies ever should. Shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same dirty air, sharing the same fear. Silas pulled his bandana down for a second and spat mud. Didn't even taste like air anymore, just grit. Across from him, the Apache group huddled together. A woman wrapped in a faded blue shawl held a little boy tight against her chest. The kid couldn't have been older than 6. Big, dark eyes, terrified, but quiet. Too quiet for a child. Like he already understood that noise meant danger. Silas noticed that. Kids on the plains grew up fast. Didn't matter what language you spoke. Fear taught everybody early. One of the younger Apache men tried to light a small fire with flint near the rock wall. Wind killed it instantly. Tried again. Dead again. Silas watched for a minute. Then, without thinking, he reached into his coat and tossed over an old tin cup. The man looked confused. Silas motioned with his hands. Shield it. Use the cup. Block the wind. The man caught on, nested the sparks inside the tin. This time the flame caught. Small, weak, but alive. They both stared at it for a second. Funny thing about fire, doesn't matter who lights it, everybody moves closer. The warmth barely helped, but the light did. Light meant hope, even a tiny one. The group gathered tighter. Someone passed dried meat around. Not enough for everyone, just pieces, small ones. Silas almost refused when it reached him. Pride, old habits. But his stomach twisted hard. He hadn't eaten since dawn. He took it, not at once, no words. Didn't need any. He chewed slowly, tasted smoke and salt and something else. Humility, maybe. Funny, years ago he would have rather starved than share food with them. Now he was grateful for a scrap. Storms had a way of rearranging a man's priorities. Another violent gust shook the rocks. A sharp crack followed. Everyone flinched. Silas peeked outside. Couldn't see anything but brown, but he could hear wood breaking. His barn, his fences, maybe his whole damn ranch, getting erased, piece by piece. For a moment, anger bubbled up. 40 years of work, gone, just like that.
Didn't matter how hard you fought, nature always won. He leaned back against the stone and closed his eyes. "Figures," he muttered. Across from him, the old Apache man was watching. Gray hair braided tight, deep lines in his face like dried riverbeds. Eyes sharp, though. Sharp and calm. Too calm for this kind of chaos. The old man tapped his chest, then pointed at Silas, then at the storm outside, then made a small gesture with his hands, like wind passing. Silas frowned, didn't get it at first. Then it hit him. This too shall pass. Simple, ancient. Silas snorted. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Always does. Just takes half your life with it." The old man didn't understand the words, but somehow he understood the meaning. He gave the faintest smile, like he'd heard that complaint from the sky 1,000 times before. A sudden cry broke the stillness. The little boy, coughing hard, too hard, dust in his lungs. The mother panicked, trying to wipe his face with a shawl, but it wasn't helping. The kid couldn't breathe.
Silas felt that old ranch instinct kick in, same one he used when calves got sick in winter. He crawled over, slow, careful, didn't want to spook him. The mother looked unsure, protective, ready to fight if she had to. Silas pulled out his canteen, poured a little water on a cloth, wrapped it around the boy's nose and mouth, made a filter, gestured. "Breathe through this, slow." The boy obeyed, coughed again, then steadied, breathing easier. The mother's shoulders dropped, relief washing over her like rain that hadn't fallen in years. She looked at Silas, really looked at him, not as a rancher, not as an enemy, just as a man who helped her child breathe. She pressed her hand to her heart, a silent thank you. Silas nodded awkwardly and went back to his spot. Didn't like the tight feeling in his chest. Didn't like how human this was getting. It was easier when people were just targets, harder when they were mothers, harder when they were kids, harder when they were just people. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time blurred. They took turns blocking cracks in the rocks with blankets, took turns checking outside, took turns sharing water. Nobody ordered anything. Nobody led. They just did what needed doing, like ants, like wolves, like something older than war. At one point, the younger Apache hunter came back dragging broken branches, tried stacking them against the wind side of the shelter. Silas joined him. Together they wedged wood and stones to block the worst of the gusts, hands brushing. No flinching, no reaching for weapons, just work, hard, honest work. After a while, the hunter glanced at Silas's old rifle, touched it, curious. Silas showed him the chamber, how it loaded, how it jammed sometimes. The hunter nodded, then showed Silas the curve of his bow, how the string was made from twisted sinew, how it stayed quiet, efficient, deadly. Different tools, same purpose, survive, protect, provide. Not so different after all. Later, when the wind dropped just enough to hear thoughts again, the old Apache man moved closer to Silas, sat beside him, shared the weak fire. They didn't speak the same language, but they didn't need to. The old man pulled something from a small pouch, a carved stone, smooth, worn. He handed it to Silas. It had a simple mark scratched into it, looked like a spiral. Silas tilted his head. The old man drew circles in the dirt, pointed at the sky, then the ground, then the people around him. Cycle, storms, life, death, return. The plains weren't owned, they were borrowed. Silas stared at the stone. Funny, he'd spent his whole life trying to own land that clearly didn't want owning. Maybe the old man had it right. Maybe you just lived on it for a while, then gave it back. For the first time, Silas didn't feel like a rancher, or a fighter, or an enemy.
Just an old man sitting in the dark next to another old man, waiting for the wind to stop. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside, something strange had happened. Not friendship, not yet, but something quieter, something stronger. Respect, the kind forged when people suffer together, when survival strips away lies, when all that's left is truth. And the truth was simple. They weren't so different, never had been. The plains had just told them different stories. Silas leaned back, exhausted, listening to the storm, listening to breathing around him, listening to a silence that wasn't hatred anymore. And somewhere between one gust and the next, he realized something that unsettled him more than any gunfight ever had. Maybe the enemy he'd been fighting his whole life had never really been them. Maybe it had always been the land, the weather, the loneliness, the fear. Maybe they were all just survivors pretending to be enemies. And maybe it had taken the worst storm of his life to finally make him see it.
The storm didn't end. It faded, like anger does, like grief does. Not all at once, just little by little. First, the screaming wind softened, from a roar to a howl, to something that sounded almost tired. Then the rocks stopped shaking, and the air stopped biting so hard. And finally, silence. Real silence. The kind that feels heavier than noise. No windmills, no cattle, no birds, nothing. Just the soft sound of people breathing. Alive, Silas opened his eyes. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't trust it. Storms had tricks. They liked to pretend they were gone, then come back twice as mean. But this time, nothing followed. Only stillness. He slowly stood and stepped toward the mouth of the rock shelter. Dust crunched under his boots. The air tasted different now. Not sharp, not violent, just dry. Dead dry. He pushed through the last hanging blanket and stepped outside. And stopped. The world wasn't his anymore. Everything had changed. The plains looked shaved bare, like a giant hand had wiped the land clean. Fences gone, posts snapped, barbed wire half buried. His barn wasn't a barn anymore, just a pile of broken boards scattered like bones. The windmill lay twisted sideways, one blade buried in the dirt like a knife. Even the hills looked different, sand piled where it didn't belong, old rocks uncovered like scars. It didn't look destroyed, it looked erased, like nothing had ever lived here. Silas stood there a long time, hands on his hips, breathing slow. 40 years of building, gone in one night. He expected anger, expected rage, but strangely, it never came. Just tired acceptance. Like when an old horse finally lies down and doesn't get back up. You don't scream, you just nod, because you knew it was coming. Behind him, footsteps. The Apache group emerged one by one. Same stunned faces, same quiet. They looked at the land the same way he did, like something sacred had been rearranged without asking permission. Nobody celebrated survival. Nobody cheered. Surviving wasn't victory out here. It was just another day. The little boy stepped past Silas first, walked slowly into the open, boots dragging lines in the dust. He stared at the horizon, then bent down and picked up something half buried. A feather, bent but still whole. He brushed it off, tucked it into his belt, like proof he'd been here, like proof something still remained. Silas watched that and felt something twist inside him. Kids were good at that, finding hope in scraps. Grown men forgot how. They moved together without talking, checking the area, counting losses, helping each other without thinking. One of the Apache women found her water skin torn. Silas handed her one of his. Didn't hesitate,
didn't barter, just passed it over. The younger hunter helped him lift a fallen beam off what used to be the corral. Together they salvaged nails, wood, anything useful. No sides, no suspicion, just work. Funny thing about rebuilding, it doesn't care who you used to hate. It just needs hands. Near the ruins of the barn, Silas found one of his horses, alive, shaking, covered in dust so thick it looked carved from clay. He approached slow, soft voice. Easy now. The animal recognized him, pressed its head into his chest. Relief. Trust. He stroked its neck, then noticed something strange. The old Apache man was beside him, quiet as ever, holding out a small pouch. Inside, crushed leaves, medicine, for breathing, for shock. He gestured toward the horse. Silas blinked. "You're helping my horse?" The old man just nodded once, like it was obvious, like suffering didn't belong to tribes. Silas laughed softly under his breath. The world's gone strange. Together, they treated the animal. Two old men kneeling in the dirt, hands steady, gentle.
Like fathers, like brothers, not enemies. By midday, the sun burned through the last of the dust. Clear sky again. Blue, bright, beautiful. Like nothing bad had ever happened. Silas hated that about the sky, how it pretended innocence. But today, he didn't argue. Today, he just looked at it, longer than usual, like maybe for the first time. They gathered near the rocks again, not for shelter, but because it felt right. Like a meeting place now, like neutral ground. The Apache women prepared a small meal from what they had left. Corn mash, dried meat, shared with Silas. No ceremony, no speech, just a bowl passed into his hands. He ate with them. Sun warm on his back, dust settling everywhere. For the first time in decades, he didn't eat alone. Didn't realize how heavy loneliness had been until it lifted. Even just for an hour. Then came the moment he knew was coming. Packing. Quiet. Efficient. The Apache band preparing to leave. Not running, not sneaking, just moving on. Like people who understood the land never belonged to one place. Silas watched them tighten saddles, tie bundles, help elders mount. That old familiar ache returned, but it wasn't fear this time. Wasn't anger. It felt like losing something. Strange, how you could spend half your life hating someone and then miss them the moment they walk away. The little boy waved at him, small, shy. Silas tipped his hat back, didn't trust his voice. The mother gave him that same hand-to-heart gesture again. Gratitude, respect, something deeper. The younger hunter nodded once, warrior to warrior. And then, the old man stepped forward, held out the carved stone again, the spiral. Silas tried to give it back, but the old man closed his hand around Silas's fingers, firm. "No, it's yours now. A gift, a memory, a lesson." Silas swallowed hard. "Reckon I'll keep it safe," he muttered. The old man smiled, then pointed at Silas, then the land, then the horizon. "Cycle. We meet again. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. The plains always bring paths back together." Silas nodded. "Yeah, maybe they do." They mounted up, rode slow, no rush, silhouettes against the light. Just like yesterday, but different. Not shadows anymore, not threats, just travelers, like him, like anyone.
He watched until they disappeared over the ridge, same ridge where he'd once watched them with suspicion. Now, it just felt empty. Silas stood alone again, same as always, but not the same. Something had shifted, something quiet, permanent. He walked back toward the ruins of his ranch, stopped halfway, looked around, really looked. This wasn't just his land, never had been. It was shared, borrowed, passed through. Maybe he'd rebuild, maybe he wouldn't. But one thing he knew for certain: next time he saw riders on that ridge, he wouldn't reach for his rifle first. He'd remember the fire, the shelter, the shared breath, the old man's calm eyes, the child holding his coat. He'd remember that the storm didn't choose sides, and neither should he. That evening he sat on the broken fence post with a small fire crackling beside him, sky painted orange and gold, the spiral stone turning slowly in his fingers, wind gentle now, almost kind. For the first time in years, the plains didn't feel like a battlefield. They felt like home. Not because he owned them, but because he understood them. And maybe understood the people on them too. The storm had taken his barn, his fences, half his cattle, but it had left him something far more valuable, something no gunfight ever could: perspective, respect, and an unexpected bond, forged not in blood, but in dust.